It is the year 1200. The sun has not fully risen yet, but you are already on your feet, not because you want to, but because you need to. The morning cold seeps through the cracks in the stone like a thin knife, and the smell rising from the damp straw where you slept mixes with the odor of smoke, sweat, and animal fat. You are not in a city. You are not in a village. You are inside a castle, one of the largest structures that humankind has built up to this point in the history of Europe. And yet, the cold finds you. Before you imagine gleaming towers, shining nights, and sumptuous banquets, I need to ask you a question. A question that will completely change the way you see this world. What was it really like to live inside a medieval castle in the year 1200 before war arrived at the gates? The answer will surprise you, because a castle was not what the movies showed you. It was something much more complex, noisier, dirtier, and at the same time much more ingenious than any building you can imagine today. Let's start with what you see when you open your eyes. The great main hall of the castle is enormous, with a wooden ceiling blackened by years of smoke. In the center, an open fire has been burning since nightfall, not for romance, but out of pure necessity. Without it, you would die of cold before the winter ended. The stone walls are more than 1 meter thick. That is not architectural exaggeration. It is what keeps invaders outside and heat inside, at least in theory. Around you, dozens of people start to stir. Knights, squires, servants, cooks, blacksmiths, laundresses, guards, a chaplain, advisors. A castle in the year 1200 is a compact city. It is estimated that a medium-sized castle housed between 200 and 500 people in its normal day-to-day life. That is before any crisis, before any war. You see a narrow stone staircase, so steep that any misstep would be fatal. This is not a design flaw. This is not a design flaw. Researchers of medieval military architecture confirm that castle staircases were deliberately built in a clockwise spiral, making it difficult for right-handed invaders who wielded swords with their right hand to descend. Even the staircase you use every day is a trap designed to kill enemies. You start to realize there is waste here. Every bone is boiled until nothing is left, and food is the first great contrast of this world. If you are a noble, the lord of the castle, his family, his high-ranking guests, the table offers roast meat, white wheat bread, wine, spices from distant lands that cost more than a servant earns in 1 year. If you are a servant, common soldier, or laborer, your meal is a pottage, a kind of thick porridge made from vegetables, legumes, and, when lucky, small pieces of meat. You eat this every day, in winter, sometimes without the luck of meat. It's not that the nobles are cruel by design. It's that the entire structure of this world was built upon a hierarchy as rigid as the stones around you. Each person in the castle has their place, their function, their level of access to heat, food, space, and protection. And it is precisely this hierarchy that will be tested when war comes. But before that, and here is the point that no one tells you, life in the castle has a fascinating internal mechanism that works with surprising precision for the time. Imagine that you could see the castle from above like a bird hovering over the battlements. What you would see would not be just a fortress, it would be a living organism. A complex system of people, animals, tools, and routines that fit together with a precision that challenges the idea that the 12th century was a primitive time. Every part of the castle has a function, and each person has a role. And the entire day, from dawn to the evening bell, is organized around a single collective mission: to survive. The inner courtyard, called the bailey, is the beating heart of this structure. That is where everything happens during the day. Blacksmiths hammer on glowing iron from early morning, producing horseshoes, nails, hinges, arrowheads, and blades. The noise is constant, metallic, deafening. Nearby, carpenters work on wooden beams and planks to repair structures damaged by time. Further on, washerwomen carry buckets of water from the central well, the well which, as you will discover, is the most vital organ of the entire castle. Without water, the castle dies in days. That is why medieval engineers, and yes, they existed, were called master builders. They positioned the well in the most protected point of the entire complex, often inside the main tower, the keep. Some castles dug wells more than 30 meters deep into solid rock. Others built underground cisterns to collect rainwater. Researchers who studied the ruins of British and French castles identified that the well's placement was often the first element defined in the design, even before the walls. Water came before all of that. That tells you something about how these people thought. They did not build castles to impress. They built to last, to withstand, to survive the worst possible scenario. And the worst possible scenario had a name known to all: the siege. But we are still in peacetime, and in peacetime, the castle has a surprisingly rich social life. In the afternoon, in the main hall, the lord of the castle receives petitions. Peasants from the region come from kilometers away to resolve land disputes, seek justice for thefts, negotiate debts. The feudal lord is not just a warrior. He is a judge, administrator, tax collector, and protector, all at the same time. He sits on an elevated chair, not out of vanity, but because physical height communicates authority immediately and unmistakably, in a society where most people cannot read. At his side, the chaplain records everything on parchment with ink made from soot and vegetable gum. Every agreement, every judgment, every amount of grain delivered as tax. These records are the medieval equivalent of a database. Their loss in a fire or attack could destabilize the entire local economy for years. The noble children, meanwhile, are being educated in another corner of the castle. Boys learn to ride horses, handle sword and lance, and memorize the basic principles of the Christian faith. Girls learn to manage a household of hundreds of people, use medicinal herbs, sew, and negotiate marriages with the coldness of an experienced diplomat. None of these children have the luxury of simply being children for long. At 7 years old, many are already sent to other castles as pages or ladies-in-waiting, a way to build political alliances using their own children as currency. It is here that the romanticization begins to crack, because beneath all this organization, all this engineering and functional hierarchy, there is a layer of daily harshness that cinema rarely shows. Infant mortality within the castle was high, even among the nobles. A simple infection could kill in days. An inflamed tooth could become fatal. Women died in childbirth with alarming frequency, and servants who fell ill were often simply replaced, like parts of a machine that cannot stop. The castle protected, but the castle also consumed. Then comes that morning different from all the others. You are in the courtyard when a knight rushes in through the drawbridge. The horse, covered in white foam. The armor dented and stained with mud. He dismounts even before the animal comes to a complete stop and shouts something that freezes the blood of everyone around. An army approaches. It is not a band of marauders. It is not a border skirmish. It is an organized army with banners, catapults, and the determination of those who have traveled for weeks to be here. And it is less than 2 days' march away. The entire castle changes in a matter of minutes. The transformation is impressive. What was an organism of peace converts, almost instantly, into a war machine, and orders cross the courtyard in all directions. The gates are reinforced with iron bars, and the drawbridge is raised. Messengers are dispatched at a gallop to neighboring estates, asking for help or warning of the threat, and the food reserves are inventoried urgently. And this is where you understand, viscerally. Because every grain stored in the barn and every barrel of salted water in the underground chambers actually represented days of life. The peasants from the surrounding lands run inside the walls bringing what they can: cattle, sacks of grain, children in arms. The castle that once housed 500 people now needs to accommodate twice as many. The space shrinks, the air worsens, and the smell intensifies. The tension is palpable, like the cold stone beneath your feet. And you realize, perhaps for the first time with total clarity, that all that engineering, the spiral staircases, the protected well, the walls more than 1 meter thick, the arrow slits in the towers for the archers, it was not a display of power. It was a survival plan built in stone. The third day begins in silence. Not the peaceful silence of an ordinary morning, with the distant sound of blacksmiths and the smell of baking bread. It is a heavy, compressed silence full of held breaths. You are on the battlements, looking at the horizon, and what you see changes something inside you forever. The army is there, camped less than 500 meters from the walls, spread across the plain like a dark stain that slowly pulses. Tents, campfires, horses, banners that sway in the cold morning wind. You can hear, if you pay attention, the muffled sound of hammers assembling wooden structures, siege machines, catapults, attack towers on wheels. They did not come to negotiate. Inside the castle, the reality of the siege begins to set in, not with a dramatic battle, but with something much more insidious. The routine of confinement. Because a medieval siege rarely began with a direct attack, it was, most of the time, a cruel game of patience. The army outside waited and waited. It cut supply routes, prevented any escape, and let time and hunger do the dirty work. Medieval generals knew something that remains true today. You do not need to destroy a fortress if you can empty the stomachs of those inside. This is where all that silent preparation of previous months takes on a life or death meaning. The castle steward, the administrator responsible for reserves, begins rationing with a mathematical precision that would surprise any modern person. Each person receives an exact amount of bread, broth, and water per day. Animals that are not essential for work are slaughtered first to save what they eat before they themselves become food. Cattle come into this account later. War horses are the last, because they may be needed for a desperate breakout. Children receive a little more, the sick a little less. Not out of cruelty, but by a brutal logic of collective survival that no one needs to explain aloud. Everyone understands. In the first days, attention, but there is still order. People pray in the chapel. Knights patrol the walls in 4-hour shifts. Archers save arrows with strict discipline, shooting only when there is a concrete target. Each arrow that leaves the walls represents 1 arrow less in the last line of defense. Then comes the first catapult. The sound is not what you would imagine. It is not an explosion. It is a mechanical moan followed by a long, low whistle. And then, an impact that you feel in your bones before you hear it with your ears. The stone, the size of a crouched man, hits the north wall, and splinters fly in all directions. No one dies in that first blow, but everyone understood the message. Time truly began to run. And it is exactly at that moment that you see something that contradicts everything you imagined about this world. Because while the warriors prepare the military defense, another group of people goes into action with equally impressive competence. The women of the castle, nobles and servants side by side, one of the few times when hierarchy flattens out of necessity. They organize the wounded, prepare herbal poultices for infections. They boil water for cleaning wounds and coordinate the distribution of food with an efficiency that the chaos of the siege cannot disrupt. The lady of the castle, wife of the feudal lord, is not a decorative figure at this moment. She is a functional second in command. Researchers who studied medieval records of sieges documented cases where noblewomen took over the complete defense of castles while their husbands were absent. They negotiated surrenders, coordinated counterattacks, decided when it was time to fight and when it was time to survive by giving ground. They were erased from popular history, but they were there. They always were. The second week of the siege is where the harshness becomes unbearable to romanticize. The food visibly decreases, the bread becomes thinner, and the broth more watery. The children stop running in the courtyard, not out of discipline, but because they have no energy. The smell inside the walls worsens when the sewage system, primitive but functional under normal conditions, begins to be overwhelmed by a doubled population. Diseases begin to circulate. The dry cough you hear from one corner becomes the cough of 10 people in 2 days. And yet, and here is the detail that captures the attention of any historian who delves into this period, the castle holds out. Not because its inhabitants are superheroes, but because they were trained, designed, and supplied precisely for this moment. The weeks of apparent normality that preceded the siege were neither luxury nor empty routine. They were constant and silent preparation for the worst possible scenario. On the 14th day, something changes on the outside. A white flag appears in the enemy camp, not a surrender, a proposal. The lord of the castle descends from the battlements, sits at the table with his closest advisors, and makes one of the most difficult decisions a medieval leader could face: negotiate or resist. Cede lands, pay tribute, hand over hostages, or continue resisting until help arrives, if it ever arrives. There is no right answer. There never was. And that is where this world of 1200 does something that no modern leadership manual can fully capture. It places you before the naked reality that surviving, often, does not mean winning. It means making the least bad choice with the information you have, the time you have left, and the resources that still exist. And then, living with that choice for the rest of your days. What happened in that specific castle, on that specific day, depends on which castle from history you are imagining. Because this scene repeated itself hundreds, perhaps thousands of times throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, in stones scattered across France, England, the Iberian Peninsula, the Middle East. Each time with different faces, each time with the same fundamental equation of resources, time, and human decision. What the story of this castle leaves us is not a lesson about war. It is a lesson about what human beings do when the space around them shrinks. How do they organize scarcity? How do they find purpose in every person when collective survival depends on it? How are engineering, food, water, and political decisions at their core? The same thing seen from different angles. And how human intelligence, when pushed to the limit, does not disappear, it focuses. You look one last time at the stones around, at the cracks through which the cold wind still enters, at the well in the center of the courtyard, and at the spiral stairs that descend in silence. And you realize that all of this is still standing. Not despite time, but because of what was thought, built, and defended by people who never imagined that someone, 800 years later, someone would be looking at these stones, trying to understand how they lived. If this video changed the way you see medieval castles, leave your comment down below. Which part surprised you the most? Like the video to help this content reach more people and subscribe to the channel to not miss the next documentaries. And if you want to continue this journey through the past, the next video about what it was like to survive a medieval winter will leave you with the same feeling as this one. Subtitles: Adriana Zanotto. You. You.